Hi, everyone. Professor Lusheen. I meant to create these review videos every week, but the first couple weeks, the first 3 weeks of this semester have been crazy. I've been doing a lot of additional presentations and stuff. And so let's get to it. I'll try to do a better job here. So back in chapter 1, I know that was a couple weeks ago, realized that the research process, it says it's cyclical, but I think it's a little bit less organized than that. You start with one idea and you kind of chase it. Sometimes it changes. Sometimes you have to go back. Sometimes you can move forward. I think I had used the example of like chutes and ladders in the lecture video. But the big thing is you have this idea of a phenomena in your experience or in the world, and then what you're going to do is you're going to try to perform a literature review to try and answer that question. If it's already been answered, is there a way you could look at it differently than what the literature has done? You know, a different application, a different context, a different scope, different measures, or a replication of another study, but in a different way. And so that's what it's all about. We're trying to understand something a little bit more. If you guys remember the brushstroke versus a portrait example from lecture. And so that's what we've done so far is week 1 was, just do you understand basically what research entails? It's more than just looking something up. It takes a lot more work than that. And then I also tried to get you to understand the importance of using a citation management program, because having to keep it all manually is difficult, and it just makes everything easier. Week 2, am I going to get to week 2 right away? Week 1 here, just some things that get in the way or are myths or misbeliefs when it comes to research. And I do think that the only way to really understand it is to perform it and make errors and then being able to recover from them. That's what it's all about. And I've said this before, but I think too many research methods courses out there in other degree programs would only stick to the book, whereas we are using the university's library website. We are going through human subjects protection training. We're going to write a proposal. And I think doing it is much more different than just reading about it. So as it would be good. With the homework, I'm trying to format something that you can build from week after week. And a lot of you started with some research questions. I've been getting into the discussion. I'm trying to help you guys out a little bit. The second week was more or less just getting your feet wet, getting your hands dirty. And as we move forward now, I want you to really challenge yourselves that, can you answer the question? Is the question answerable in its current form? And if it is, how can we change the question? How can we change or adjust our search or key terms in order to find what is the best representation of literature of what we know about that subject, but isn't answering it, or isn't answering it in a way that you're interested. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And so even though it focuses on stating the problem clearly, what I want you to do is really challenge yourself to try to get that question answered. And I'm going to be here now to really say, well, we can already find that. We can Google that. And if you can Google it and find it, well, then what additional things? And I want you guys to really maybe start with Google, but then move to the library website. We had some students in week 2 who invested too much of their time in Google and Google Scholar, and they came up with sources that were not refereed. It was either a newspaper or a blog or a company white paper. If it isn't refereed, then we can't state it as part of it comes from research, that it's been tested, and that's what we can find out. So the idea is you're trying to answer your question, but to the point where you can become an expert in it, in reviewing the literature, as much as there is about it, and then you're able to reword, reformat your question, and then continue with the proposal. So each week I want to go over the quiz. We have a couple questions here. When the class gets below 80% on a question, I kind of like to discuss it. So here you see the stats. You guys are doing well. One question was, what's the difference between a dependent and an independent variable? I mean, the independent variable is the one that you are controlling, and then the dependent is the reactive. And so here we got the thing about, or the question regarding teaching reading strategies to improve performance in the study. Explicit teaching of reading strategies would be, yes, the independent variable. It's the thing you're controlling. Over here, elementary students who watch more TV more than 3 hours a day are more likely to be overweight than students who watch less. Students' weight is the dependent. It's the outcome measure that you'd be using. Let's see. So in Module 1, every week I collect a lot of stats when I grade. I do that because if somebody's time or touch or posts are really low, it allows me to reach out to that student and see if there's anything I can do to help out. Everybody's doing well. But the problem is these are not perfect numbers, so I don't use them as a means to grade. I use it as a means to look a little bit further. That's it. That's all. Quiz 2. Again, you guys are doing well. The two questions. One is, what's the primary purpose of a thorough literature review? And I just stated, okay, I didn't plan this, but I stated this: to become an expert in the area of your interest. It's what it's about. To understand everything you can about what you're curious about, leading up to what isn't known. So in many ways, that's what it is. Help interpret your own findings. No, that would be just the statistical methods. Point you toward the proper method. No, that's not what it's about either. So provide evidence of your hypothesis. Correct. Right. That's the after you collect data. So it's becoming an expert. A well-written literature review emphasizes critique and synthesis of the work. Oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what it is. You're finding things that you're going to have themes and results that really define what you want, but then there's going to be possibly some critical or dissenting findings. What did you learn? What did you learn from that literature? Because that really should help you make a better study design. Cool. It's kind of funny how that worked out. Literature review using the library website. So it was really about getting in there and practicing. And I had talked about the concept of jumping down the rabbit hole, Alice in Wonderland. Search, find a paper, read the abstract. Oh, that's interesting. It seems like it applies. Read the intro. How did they, what were their methods? What were their variables? How did they measure and collect and analyze? And then read the conclusions, because that's when researchers are allowed a little bit more, they're a little bit more liberal with interpretation. So conclusions need to be more in line with what they had originally proposed, but at the end they kind of can talk a little bit further. And I find that that's a great place to maybe even find a research topic. That's where I found my dissertation topic was, the discussion after the conclusions. The recommendations, I guess is what they call it. So as you do that, it's meant to be a learning process. You're gaining a better understanding. It may educate you, and you may change direction a little bit on your original proposal or reword it a little bit. That's what it's all about. When I was tasked with writing a chapter for a book with my colleagues in the department, I was asked to write one on safety statistics. And so I began my literature review, and I had an idea what I wanted to write about. But what was interesting was, at that time, there was a lot of published research about how an individual's decision-making was being affected by the media which was delivering it. And so I jumped down a rabbit hole, and I ended up writing a chapter we didn't plan for about how bias, personal bias or media influence bias can affect our interpretation and therefore our behavior of safety and public health statistics. And I wrote the chapter with a lawyer and a medical doctor, and so it became what is free speech, but what is libel? What have we seen for how it affects certain populations or sample populations' health when they didn't trust a particular source of recommendations in media, and it was really fascinating. And then the doctor talked about doctor related stuff. So I'm going a little bit long here, but that was a really exciting chapter. Another thing I want you to realize is, your topic can be basically anything, but as you consume the literature, I want you to take note of some of the things that the authors are finding, what they're concluding. Like specifically, I've reached out to a few of you that you want your dependent variable to be injuries. The thing is, how long do you have to wait between the treatment or the initial setup to when injuries would occur? So that's a long period of time. So is there something more proximal or short term that you could measure? What are predictors of accidents? What are things, or whatever type of safety issue or health issue, environmental issue you're concerned with, what might be something that exists before it happens or moderates or mediates whether something happens? Think about that. And then how you're going to measure it too. And so some of you are starting out very complex. We all do that. That's cool. But then I will try to be here to help you. And you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Rebecca. We're here to help you. So as we progress, I want you to start thinking about, as you have a question, as you're acquiring relevant research, published research literature, I want you to start thinking about the variables and the measures. And that's going to help us when we get to the point where we're going to start thinking about design. So Module 3, we're getting into narrowing our research question. I kind of talked about that. It's a process. Some of you are going to get to a point where you may actually have to restart, in the third week of possibly the fourth week. The sooner you can capture the relevant published work, the quicker you can get to your final thing. We're getting into different categories of research design. Qualitative. If there isn't much known about something, the phenomenon is pretty much unknown, you usually start with qualitative, and that is to find a sample population and interview them or observe them. And so you don't have quantitative numbers. You can't really run statistics other than if you were to impute the text into nodes and trees, and then you can analyze that. But for the most part, it's discovery. Quantitative is more of a testing, experimental verification of a theory or an assumption. Now, what's interesting is in our safety field, because we're so applied, we tend to be mixed methods. So there's probably going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And that's what we're going to be covering over the next few weeks. Reminding you again what the variables are, the dependent, the independent. The demographic are conditions of the subjects that may influence the actual dependent variable. And it would be part of independent. So we can actually design the study to try and control for these types of things. And then there's the confounding or the extraneous, that we do the best we can to limit it, but we need to at least admit that it could be affecting our outcomes. In Module 4, we're going to be getting into the writing of a proposal. So if you can get to the point where you actually have your research question pretty well nailed down, and a handful of papers that do a really good job of providing the context and scope of the topic itself, then you can start going through, putting your work into a flow chart, or, I've got this other one over here. So these are both visuals. I think the textbook does a pretty good job of walking you through it as well. But if you rush through this planning and design part, that's when things can get rough later on. At the same time, this week and next, so modules 3 and 4, I want everybody to go through the first two basic trainings for human subjects protection. I think it takes a while. A few of you have already gotten it done. I need evidence that you've completed the modules. But I think it's extremely important as you're learning to be researchers, to go through this. And so what you're going to be uploading are copies of your certificates. So you're doing the human subjects first. You're going to do responsible conduct of research, and then you're going to do human subjects research, social behavior, educational sciences, all researchers basic stage. I actually have to redo this stuff too. I think I think I've already surpassed my deadline, so I gotta do that. So that's what you're going to be doing. And so make sure you give yourself adequate time. I think it takes anywhere from could take up to 4 hours, I think, what I've heard. Maybe more, depending if you're coming and going, doing it and coming back. Could take a little bit more. But it's going to take time. So don't wait until the final Sunday. I recommend that. And lastly, a lot of you have already attended an office hour. I encourage it because we can talk about, how things are going. We can review quizzes. We can review assignments. We can kind of talk about your topic and how things are going. For the most part, I think that this class is probably doing better than I've had in the previous 3 years. So my typical issues that I talk about aren't there because you guys are doing a really good job. But the thing is, I want to make sure that you're putting in the effort now and doing the right things so that as you get to the point where you're actually working on your research proposal, that everything's in line and you don't have to start over. So if you have questions, please reach out to me. Again, I'm meeting, this is Central Time because I'm in Wisconsin. You may be somewhere else. So it's 8 a.m. in the morning. On Sundays, I'll get on WebEx. You can get onto it through Canvas. And then I'm also on at 7 p.m. However, on September 28th, I'm going to be traveling for some board of directors things. So I'll be able to meet in the morning, so 8 a.m. on Sunday the 28th, but I will not be able to meet at 7 p.m. in the evening. And I'm going to be traveling all week. So the soonest I could really talk to anybody would be Friday afternoon. So I apologize for that, but I'll do the best I can to respond to emails. One last thing. All right, so one last thing. If you haven't yet, I think it is really important that you guys contact Rebecca. You can make an appointment with a different librarian if she's not available. One thing that might help you is if you go into class guides and go to occupational safety and health and occupational environmental safety and health. It's got the classes here and everything, but it's got key research databases here. And I think Rebecca went over this. It's got key journals. I mean, she does such a fantastic job. Just want to make sure that you guys are taking advantage of, or at least exploring, these resources. It's very important. You can't do this just using Google Scholar and Google. You need to be able to get into the databases and access the referee journals. That's all I got. Hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you in the office hours. Thanks, everybody.